Well, my friends, it's the next day on this old Gibson. I've got it cleaned up pretty good. I'm getting picky now. I'm up here on the detail of this. You can see how I've detailed this neck joint here, and it's completely cleaned out now, sanded and everything. It looks pretty nice. This side here, if you look at it closely, you can see there's still quite a bit of junk in the corners there. I've started cleaning out just this level of the corner, but you can see there's finish up in here, the old finish. About the only way you can get that finish out is you just take a scraper. You know, I usually sharpen up these blades even sharper, and you just have to get down. You actually hold the blade between your fingers like this, and you take that point and you put it in there and you just start scraping. Most of the time you have to scrape across the grain because that's the only way it's practical. It's not the way you want to do it, it's just the way that you have to do it. And anyway, you scrape, and you try not to scrape the wood too much. Once you start feeling wood fiber, you kind of lighten up. But you scrape that finish until you can get down to the bare wood. You know, if you want to do a better job, then you get in there and you actually scrape away, you scrape the length of the neck then. So like I'm getting in there on individual spots, and I'm scraping this way, and that will keep it from scratching, keep the wood flatter. I can still see there's something right here. It's not completely gone. Very light again right on top, going across the grain. I think I'm through that now. Anyway, you just back and forth like that, and eventually you'll get it. It doesn't take too long to do it, really. It's just a technique thing. But there you go. You can see that all of that finish is gone now, and I've still got to go down through the rest of this crack and do that. Like where this finish is built up right in the crack, I just take my X-Acto knife and just place it flat on the, and push right under the finish like that, and just literally pick it right up. You know, there's lots of techniques you can use. It depends on the problem you're having. If it's wide flat finish, you want to scrape it. If it's, you know, just a pile of finish, you can slide under it and pick it up and bust it. And that's kind of what I'm doing right here right now. This is kind of a thick buildup, and I'm just going in from two different directions right on the finish, and I've pretty much got it out of there. Once you get it out of there, then you want to go back to your scraping technique and scrape with the grain. And anyway, then you just want to scrape it. Sometimes you can scrape to the neck like this. I'm scraping toward the neck. Other times you want to scrape away from the neck, you know, and you just vary it. Especially depending on if you're getting any kind of scratching or bumping or anything, you might have to vary your approach. But you just keep doing that until you're satisfied. That looks pretty good now. I still got, you know, really detailed level work to do here yet. If you really get down and get really picky, you can make this as clean as it was when it was brand new. And that's what I'm trying to do here, is get it that clean. Because when you restain it, it's nice to not look there and not see any reason to think it was refinished, you know. But if you leave all that junk in there, you can pretty much tell it's been refinished. If you get it all cleaned out to bare wood, and you start from scratch with your finish and everything, then it looks like, you know, an original finish. Once you get that clean, then you can take some fresh sandpaper, and this is not really fresh, and you can just take something that you can get right into the crack with and sand like that right into the crack, right into the joint, and just bounce it right off the joint. And if you just stay with that a little bit and then blend it out like this, come out a little further, it eventually looks pretty darn clean, and we're just about there. You know, you can always do more, so I'll probably do some more here. But I just thought I'd show you some of those close-up techniques that you can use to really work on a finish and clean it up. The big cabinet scraper is what you take the bulk of it off with, and even this, if you're really good with your cabinet scraper, you can get most of this with your cabinet scraper. In fact, often I can get it all. But you know, I'm taking this one on from that Caleb had started here, so he hadn't had a lot of experience scraping finishes off, and he did a pretty good job overall, but just needs a little bit of TLC. By the way, it occurred to me as I'm working on the detail of this that people are going to be wondering why we don't use chemical strippers to strip the finish off of instruments. Well, you know, I'm sure there's probably cases where you could get away with that. But I don't do it, mainly because of the impact it can have on your plastics. And when I say can have, I kind of mean will have. It's pretty much inevitable that you start putting chemicals on your plastics, especially your bindings and any of your inlay that's plastic or anything like that, or your pick guard. Those things are going to either curl up, get brittle and crack, you know, come loose, or they'll just get mushy and get smeary, and you know, I mean, all kinds. I've had all kinds of reactions from different chemicals on these plastics. Other people will say, well, I did it on mine, didn't have any problem. Well, that may be true. You may get away with it right away, but then 6 months down the road, after those chemicals have had time to really work on your plastic, they may start cracking and breaking and curling up and all that. Ask me how I know. I mean, seriously, I'm not just making this up. It's not something I just think could happen. I've witnessed it. For instance, here's just one example, and this is why I don't use those liquid polishes. A Martin guitar, customer brought, you know, his Martin to me, and, you know, it was a mess, and I cleaned it all up. I polished it, and I used liquid polish, and I can't remember whose polish it was. At the time I used a variety. I used Gibson and Fender and Martin, so I don't want to pick on any one of them. I don't know which one it was, but anyway, I used a liquid polish on it, and just a couple of months later he calls back and he says, you know, when you had that guitar, did you put anything on the pick guard? And I said, yeah, I used a Martin liquid polish, or, you know, whatever polish it was. Again, I shouldn't say Martin. Anyway, I used the liquid guitar polish on it. And he said, well, the pick guard's curling up on it now. You know, and I'm telling you, it does that. You know, don't use anything that has chemicals on your plastics. Water's okay. Beyond water, I don't put anything on plastics if I can avoid it. I mean, most of the time it'll happen, but I try to avoid putting any kind of chemicals on your plastics. Now, when you finish it, obviously your finish has to go over your plastic, but other than that, I don't let anything get on my plastics if I can avoid it. Just so you know, you can do what you want to, and if you think I'm being overly cautious, feel free to do whatever you want to do. If you learn how to use these manual techniques, they work really well, and like I said, if you really get good with your scraper and get your scraper good and sharp, like I've shown in a video or two, then you can really do about 90% of this detail all with one big scraper. Since this was already done, and all I've got left is the detail, I'm just using the X-Acto knife at this time. I've about got it all off of here, but I've still got some more to go, a little bit more, and I'm going to get this all cleaned up, and I'll show you what it looks like just before we start staining it and all the different things we're going to do. Oh, and just to beat the dead horse a little bit more, you know, obviously I see lots of instruments coming in here with the pick guards curled up, and in almost all cases I'll ask the customer, I said, what kind of maintenance do you do on this in terms of your finish and, you know, things like that? What kind of polishes do you use, etc.? And they'll say, oh, I use those liquid spray polishes. There you go. Pick guards curled up, they use liquid spray polishes. I would say in 9 out of 10 times I ask, that's the answer I get. You can put that in your pipe and smoke it. Well, I believe I've got this thing as cleaned up as it needs to be, and yeah, there's still stuff around the binding, but that doesn't matter because I'm getting ready to stain it, and I'm going to have to clean all the binding after I get all done staining everything. So I've got my dark stain here, and that's what I'm going to go with. Earlier on, we looked at a bunch of pictures of these online, and this is, you know, believe it or not, that's kind of what they look like. It looks a little odd right now because it looks a little darker and stuff, but once you get the finishes on it, it changes everything, and I think it's going to look just fine. Here we go with the stain on the back. I'm just about out of this dark brown stain, actually. I've used this same bottle for, I couldn't tell you how many years. I know at least 20, perhaps more than that. I have another bottle, a new bottle on the shelf here. I hope this will get me through the whole guitar, because the new bottle could be a different color for all I know. I didn't think about that till just now, so I hope I don't have to create a whole bunch more work for myself by stripping this all off again. And on camera this might look splotchy because, you know, it's wet and it dries in different places quicker and stuff, but it does a pretty good job of blending it all evenly, and it really doesn't look bad. But it looks like it goes on splotchy, I'm sure.
From where I stand, I can see all the lights of the city. For one man to love one woman so much, it's a pity.
And I'll go on to the sides now and get the sides. I don't even bother trying to keep it off the plastic because it's just easier to scrape all the plastic at once. It just, you know, you've done a million of these things, you just kind of learn how to do it. And that's the best way, is just not to worry about it. People say, why don't you tape it off? Well, you can see what taping it off did for him. It still got all over it. Didn't get it completely over it, but I would actually just as soon have it completely over it, because you got to scrape it anyway. And it makes it nice and clean looking when you get it all scraped evenly, and by getting it all over the whole thing, then you scrape it all evenly, you know. And I don't know if that makes sense to you, but it just doesn't make any sense to tape it off. Trust me, I've done that, been there, done that a bunch of times, and you're wasting your time. The only time it makes sense to tape it off is when you're doing some airbrushing, and I do tape it off sometimes then, but even then maybe kind of minimal. Just depends on this situation. Alright, there's places like right in here that's not getting any finish, and for some reason there's little holes there or something, and so I'll have to take a brush, come back and touch up places like that. We were able to fill all the big holes that were knocked into the side of it here. You can't really see those now. So everything's looking pretty good. Hopefully I'll have enough here to do this whole thing, one coat at least. If I had to go back over it with the other stuff, that wouldn't be so bad, as long as I can get one full coat of this. But it looks like this is going to be the last bit out of this bottle. Probably should put a bottle like that up on the mantle. I mean, anything that can last 20 plus years in the bottle. I seriously think that bottle could be easily 25 years old and might be older than that. Anything that can last that long in the bottle and still be perfectly usable, it probably should be put up on the mantle. You know, some kind words should be said over it. If you think about it, that bottle's gotten me out of a lot of jams. It's fixed a lot of stuff. No telling how many guitars it's been used on. No telling, just no telling. Again, down in these cracks and crevices, we'll have to get a brush and touch it up.
From where I stand, I can see the cantina she goes to, where she's not supposed to, but goes anyway. From where I stand, I can hear music and laughter. Carmilla tells me that's what her young heart is after.
Well, there you go. I think that looks pretty good, pretty even. Gonna need to do some little fine touch up now with a paintbrush and, you know, get into little cracks and crevices, kind of like in these little corners and things. I'm not gonna show all that, but I'll show you what it looks like when I start putting finish on. Looking, detailing this, there's some little holes, you know, just kind of natural occurring where the back was taken off and it was glued back on. So there's some little tiny cavities. I'm taking this, this is called, well, it's just an extra thick CA glue is all it is. And for those of you who don't understand CA glue, it's just super glue basically. Cyanoacrylate. That's, I think, how you pronounce it. And I'm just putting a little drop on this little plastic pointer here. And it's easier to control this way. And then I just take that little pointer and put it in the hole and try to fill the hole with this extra thick stuff. Because I can tell you for sure, finish ain't gonna fill that hole. It just won't do it. And your fillers and all that stuff are just crap. None of them work. The CA glue is about your only hope on this kind of thing. And I'm seriously telling you, that's about your only hope. I've tried everything. And the CA glue, if you can, you know, fill it with sawdust and CA glue and stuff, it really does a good job if you can be very neat about it. The only way you can really be neat about it is apply it with like a toothpick or apply it with something like this. Because if you try to apply it directly out of the bottle, it's just not a good idea. Especially for detail. This extra thick, it spans the crack and just closes it off. And then I can sand it again, and I'll probably have to restain these areas, but that's okay. As long as I can get them filled and smoothed out. And I know you can't really see what I'm doing very well here, so try to zoom it in a little bit for you. Most of those are already full, but this extra thick CA glue, it does go on extra thick, as it says. By the way, this extra thick, I think all the extra thick means is that it's CA glue that's old. That's pretty much what I think it means. I mean, I'm kind of joking about that, but that's kind of the truth. As your CA glue gets older, it gets thicker. It won't last as long in the bottle, by the way, so I wouldn't buy a large bottle of the extra thick. I'd buy the smallest bottle you can if you planning to do the same thing. But I can tell you the extra thick fills it way faster than the thin. The thin works, especially if you got a really tight crack, then you're going to want to use the thin. But in this case, these are pretty big holes. And, you know, everything's relative. When I say pretty big, I mean they're noticeable to your eye. They're not huge in terms of measurement. They're probably less than a millimeter wide or anything like that. But they're still pretty good size. So, you know, the thin would just run down in there and wouldn't really fill the hole. Where this thick looks like it's already filled it. Now I'm just gonna let this stuff dry natural. That'll take it a while. CA glue in general, when you want it to dry fast, it always dries really slow, and vice versa. When you want it to dry really slow, it always dries really fast. That's just the way CA glue is, and it can read your mind. So I'm going to let this stuff dry natural, and that means that it's probably going to take it 24 hours because I'm wanting it to do it fast. But I don't want to spritz this with the accelerator, mainly because I don't want to mess up my finish that I've worked on here. Even though I'm going to end up sanding this, I'm sure. I'm just trying to fill every little void I can see. This little tiny plastic applicator thing, it had a little tiny brush on the very end of it. It's not going to focus on that probably. It had a little tiny brush on the end of it, and I just cut that off and just used this real sharp little point, and that seems to be working very well. Put a little bit more on this first place I put it on here. I don't see any more big holes in it anywhere. Those are the only ones I see, which is pretty remarkable for taking the back off and putting the back on here. All right, like I said, I'm going to let that dry and or cure, whatever your word is that you like. Once I know that's set up pretty well, I'll move on to the next step. All right, I could tell you that I waited for this to dry and take all that time, and I waited about a minute or two, and it wasn't acting like it was going to dry anytime in the near future. So I held the accelerator way back from it and just misted it very lightly, and that seems to have set it up. So I'm going to sand these areas smooth now, and they should fill in the grain. And I will have to re-stain this, but that's not that big a deal. CA glue sands surprisingly easy. I always thought it would be really hard to sand, but honestly it sands pretty easy. Maybe you can see the edge there where the fills are. When you put the dark stain back over that, you'll never see that, I don't think, at all. In fact, I don't think you'll see it even a little bit. By wiping that off, I can see where the CA glue is better, and I can sand it even a little bit more and be very specific about it. Okay, that's very smooth now, and the holes are completely filled in. Now I got a little bit up here yet to work on. With the other types of fillers, we would have been just all day trying to get all this fixed perfectly. Now we go back to our dye, and this bottle still has enough left in it for a couple more last hurrahs here. And now you really can't see it at all. It's just gone pretty much. It really is pretty much just completely gone. I mean, especially once you get the finish over it. Okay, I think, I'm going to call that good enough for the moment. I always say that way because no doubt I'll find something else. But I'll find that something else while I'm working on scraping the binding clean. Typically when you do other detail work like this, you'll see other problems. I'm going to start on that. You can use various and sundry tools for this. Probably one of the easiest is just use a single edge straight razor blade like this. And if I can get it open without destroying my hand. These are very old blades and the packing is stuck to them and everything, but they'll serve the purpose. I'm just going to show you a little bit of the technique on this, and then we'll do the rest off camera. But I just grab a hold of it like this. I always set my finger kind of as a depth gauge on the top up here, and it protrude just enough of it over the edge to get down to the bottom of the binding. Then you just have to kind of learn how to scrape without getting a lot of chatter. If you can feel it vibrating in your hand and you're getting chatter, and you really don't want that for the most part, you want it to be smooth. It's getting there. I can tell whoever scraped this before didn't do a great job on it, because just as an example, you can see there's a little tiny line inside of here. Between here and here, there's a little tiny line. And so they probably only had their scraper stuck over here to that line, and were scraping it kind of deep right there. So now I'm going to try to smooth that out and get rid of that line. Sometimes that takes quite a bit of work, because somebody worked at putting that in there. There, it's gone, it's clean. Now that's the technique for the side. Here's the technique for the top, and it needs to be done as well. So you don't get to just go around this one time. You get to go around it at least twice. All right, so here's the white that I just scraped off, and now we'll do the same area here on the top. Now the trick on the top here, in this case, since it's all black, I can't see how deep this binding goes, and I don't know how deep it goes. So this is going to be a little bit of a trial and error here. I would assume it's a multi-piece binding, but maybe not. Actually, I think maybe not, because I tried to go just a hair past what I thought was the end of the white, and it looks like it's going to be wood, so I'm going to stop right there. It probably is only just one little white binding. It doesn't look like it has any extra decorative binding on the inside there. And the problem even with that is the binding can be different thicknesses. Like right here it's fairly thick, but here it's pretty thin. So I actually have to thin down here. You have to be very careful, especially on these old instruments. Now on my instruments I'm building, I've got a little better feel for how much binding is there, and I can see it, of course. In this case, since Caleb did this staining, I don't really know how much binding was under here, but I can see here that I'm doing all right, and it's going to be fine. Anyway, so once you get out of the hard area there by the neck, you can go pretty fast on this. You really want to be careful though, because you can make a mess pretty quickly. If you scrape too much, like right here, I did kind of get a little deep. I can come back with a very fine little tiny black paintbrush and get in there and just hit the black a little bit and clean that up, and then even maybe have to scrape it again a little bit. No big deal, but you just have to detail it. I can tell you right now, this binding is very thin on this. This is not a very thick white binding, so I'm going to have to be very careful as I go around this. I can barely leave any exposed at all. In fact, almost none. Wow, it's really thin right here. It's like paper thin in places. A little thicker than that, but not much. Maybe 20 thousandths thick, you know, and that's pretty thin for binding. So I just have to be very careful. What I can do sometimes to trick the eye is when the binding gets really thin, I'll slant this down a little bit more. Because of the angle, it'll make the top of it look like it's a little bit wider than it is. And that's just kind of what you have to do sometimes to trick everything. So that's the whole technique. Now I'm just going to go ahead and kind of make time here and try to get it done. And as I said, I'll probably do all of that off camera. Sometimes you switch your directions up if you're getting chatter. You switch up how you're holding it. Everything makes a difference on the chatter. But there you can see how nice and clean that looks, you know, compared to that on this side. So we're getting there, and I'll get it all cleaned up and then I'll show you what it looks like. Might point out, when you get into the final detail of places like this, then I'll take maybe a little tiny scraper, something like this that I made, and it's a little chisel scraper combo, and I just get in there like that and scrape out the last little detail. Or you could use an X-Acto blade, and I use that too. It really just depends on the situation. But you can see there it does a nice job, gets right into the corner. I think I've got the whole side done on this now. As a footnote, I told you that there was a line between the side here and the binding. You know, like they didn't scrape the whole binding clean. Well, that's exactly what happened all the way around. So in other words, they only scraped the top part of the binding clean at the Gibson factory. They didn't get the full length of the binding. So I scraped the whole side of the binding clean all the way to the wood. And the reason they do that in the factory is because it saves them time. You know, like if they were to scrape a little bit too deep, they would scratch the wood. Well, I'm pretty confident in my scraping technique, so I scraped the whole thing. The whole binding is clean now all the way to the wood. Now I'm going to scrape off this top. And as I already told you, this is very thin, so this is going to be a little bit more aggravating to me, but I'll get it done and I'll show you the final product. It's really cold outside, a little bit of snow and those kinds of things, and so I am stepping over to the dark side here just to spray this with some nitrocellulose lacquer. You really won't be able to see exactly what I'm doing, but I'm not willing to bring the camera in here and get this spray all over it either. So there you go.
I I see you differently. I see you there with a man. Carmilla is lying, I see it from where I stand.
Looking pretty good. We'll let that sit and dry for a few hours and give it another coat. Well, my friends, it's been several days. I put, I don't know, 6-7 coats of lacquer on this. And it's been drying for 4 or 5 days, maybe a little longer. Weekends get in there, lots of wood hauling gets in there, so I just forget how long it's been. But anyway, I'm going to lightly sand this. I'm going to sand it with probably something like a 600 to knock it down reasonably quick. I've mentioned before that, I love this sandpaper. This is this no slip grip, advanced abrasives, 3M. This is a 220. I can get this all the way to a 400, but I can't get it beyond that I can find. Well, one of my viewers sent me this 600. It's a Duragold 600. Now this is a wet or dry. The advantage of this is the finish does not stick to this. You can sand the finish all day long and then just wipe this on your carpet and it wipes right off. No buildup, no, whatever. So that's what the test is for this right now. I'm going to test this 600, the first time I've ever tried it, on this finish and see if it builds up or if it just sands it. Now, I know instantly some of you are going to say, you need to be doing it wet. Well, I've done it wet. You can't even imagine the thousands of ways I've tried to do this. And every time it builds up, except with this sandpaper when I sand it dry. So that's my goal, is to try this to see if it'll sand and not build up. So I'm just trying to lightly knock down the, the dust and the roughness of the finish. Not trying to get a perfect finish at this point. It takes a lot of lacquer to make a decent finish because it dries so thin. I can already tell, I don't think this is going to do it. It's already building up and it's rolling under here. That's what the difference is. You don't get any rolling, you don't get any buildup, nothing with this kind of sandpaper. Instantly, you can already see it's already starting to build up. Little tiny those little flakes, those little tiny white spots. And I can feel it rolling under my sandpaper, under my fingers. I can actually feel the little rolls rolling back and forth. I'm pretty sure this finish is dry enough to do this. As a contrasting thing, let's find the 400. I know I've got some here somewhere. No, I don't see the 400 right now. I'll just try a piece of 320. That's close enough. So I'll take this 320 and do basically the same thing, and I don't think I'll feel any rolling, and I don't think I'll feel any buildup. I might be wrong. Maybe this finish isn't going to work, but instantly it feels different. Like I can wipe this off, and you can see how it just doesn't build up. There's no white left spots on there. This is the greatest sandpaper ever designed. I promise you it is. I've sanded as much as anybody, trust me. This sandpaper is killer. Why they don't make it in 400, 600, etc., I don't know. Well, I mean, they do make it in 400, sorry. But why they don't make it in 600 and finer, I don't know. It may be some sort of restriction with the coatings and things they use that it just can't go that small. I don't know. But it would be the best thing ever if they would make this in 600 and even finer. 600 would be, I'd be happy with that. But even this 320, it sands so smooth, it really doesn't do a bad job. I just wish it was 600, that's all. So I'm just going to use this 320 and sand this thing lightly because it drives me crazy with that stuff rolling under the sandpaper. This doesn't do that at all. It just sands as perfect as anything you would ever expect. It's just amazing the difference. I'm not going to make you watch me do this for the next hour. I'm going to really go over this whole thing though and try to knock off any bumps or any dust, any high spots, and then we're going to load up and spray it again. And just for the record, because I know I'm going to get 1,000 comments, yes, I know about wet sanding. Yes, I know about putting soap in the water. Yes, I've done it every way you can possibly do it with all kinds of wet and dry sandpaper. And yes, it sort of works better when you do it that way, but it doesn't work as good as this. I don't care what you say, it does not work as good as this. This is what I'm trying to find, something like this in a very fine sandpaper. Besides that, sanding it dry is way less messy, and on a wooden instrument, it's just my preferred way to do it is to sand it dry. But I don't care. I would sand it wet if I could get the kind of results I can get with this dry sandpaper. I can't. So that's why I use this dry sandpaper. It works great. I absolutely love this stuff. I just wish they made it in a 600 or an 800 or something like that. My friends, it's been another week or so of drying on this guitar, and we have to sand it out again. You can see all the little bumps in there. Lacquer finish just goes away from any kind of defect. And I know you're saying use a filler first. I've done that. They don't do any better. I've tried every filler on the market. As a matter of fact, I could show you probably 15 of them in my cabinet right now. Yeah, and then like here I even filled this with CA glue, and it's still, found a way to make a mark there. It's annoying as heck. Finish work is by far the hardest work I do. By far. There's nothing even compares to it. You bring me the most broken guitar in the world, and that's easy to fix compared to doing finish work. And that's the black and white fact, truth of it. Thank goodness I have found this kind of sandpaper, because this kind of sandpaper at least makes it a little bit more pleasant on the sanding part. And yes, I know all about all the other sandpapers and using the wet and dry and using dish soap and using this and that and 14 other million things. But this is by far the easiest because it just wipes right off like that, and you just go back to sanding. And you don't have all the mess of the water and all that junk. The only negative of this is it's only available up to 400. But at this point in time, that's all I need. Until I get down to the very, very final, then I can switch over to the, wet and dry and whatever I have to switch over to. Darn it, that looks like that sanded through right there. And I don't know why it would have done that. I've put on 8 or 10 more coats. I don't know. I just can't win for losing on finishes. When it comes to finishes, I really shouldn't do any finishes because I'm not any good at it. It really does suck. It really does. I wouldn't have any problem with fillers and, sanding sealers and all that. I wouldn't have any problem with them if they would work with 1 or 2 applications, but they're just like the finish. You got to put it on 4 or 5 times. It's like, why bother with those if you got to put on the finish 4 or 5 times? You might as well just do the finish. Forget the sanding sealers. It's very hard to sand up to something like you have to sand up to here. Like when you're finishing a tabletop, you don't have to bump into things like this. That's another thing that makes this much more difficult. Anyway, this is just a long, involved process with tons and tons and tons of elbow grease. I'm not going to make you listen to me whine anymore. I'm just going to do this all off camera, and I'll show you what it looks like when I'm ready to apply the next finish. Okay, I'm going to say it. This is the last instrument I'm going to refinish for anyone. Period. Never going to do it again. It's over with. I'm done with that. My hands hurt too much, and it just requires way too much sanding, and I'm over it. So I'll do it for myself, but only for myself. I will never do it for for hire again. My friends, I have worked on this Gibson's finish until I'm blue in the face. I really don't know what else to do, but you can see how it's not getting any better. I started sanding it here to try to get rid of it, and it's just killing me sanding it. It's just killing me. I'm just about tempted to just strip it off and start over. It's that bad. And I think I'm going to use a different finish, like maybe coat it with shellac and then put an oil varnish over it, because I have just about had it. I'm not going to change the top. I'll leave the top like it is because it's fairly good, but the back and sides, I think I may just do that because this is just driving me absolutely bonkers. Yeah, I really never seen one quite like this one. It's just like, it's got my number and it ain't gonna change. And you know, like you just sand and sand and sand and sand and sand, and it just doesn't get any better. So that's the definition of insanity, is keep doing the same thing over and over and not getting any different results, you know. So I'm going to do something different and get a different result. So I've got my Rockwell sander here. This is that one with the dual discs thing. It spins in different directions and it oscillates. It really does a pretty good job. I've got some fairly heavy paper on here. This is 120, so let's see what happens. Looks like kind of a mess at the moment. Hoping it won't prove to be that way. 220 will knock it the rest of the way down, but maybe not. Yeah, it's just fighting me every step of the way. Well, there's what a couple of more minutes of sanding did. Yeah, it's back to ugly duckling stage. But that's what I felt like I had to do. I'm just tired of dealing with it. Well, my friends, I've used the sander as much as I can. Now, I have hand sanded most of the back too, so that I've got the back in pretty good shape. It's probably even ready for staining, the back is, but the sides I have to sand them some more. But before I even get to that, I'm going to go ahead and get the finish off the neck. Most of the neck's not too bad, but I'm just going to take it off because it's just too much hassle. It's not very hard to get it off the neck with the scraper. I could have scraped the whole body, and in hindsight, it might have been just as fast to scrape it as it was to sand it. If you do a good job with a scraper, you barely have to sand anything. It just takes a while. You can see there in real time how fast you can get it off of there. This is why I don't use chemical strippers. Chemical strippers, they cause as many problems as they fix, and they can really do a number on your plastics. They can melt your plastics and things, so I just don't use them. And half the time when you do use chemical strippers, you end up having to do stuff like this anyway. In just that little bit amount of time right there, you can see how I've got most of it off already. But I'll finish the rest off camera, and I'll let you see some more progress as I make it. It's been about 1 hour since I showed the guitar. That's the progress I made in just an hour, so it's really about ready to stain again. I got to do a little more detail sanding, but it's pretty dang close. A little bit more sanding, I'm sure, wouldn't hurt anything. But we'll be putting finish back on this before the end of the day, I'm sure. And there's what it looks like in less than 10 minutes. Now, granted, the white has to be cleaned off again, and some people are going to say, you should have taped that off. Well, taping doesn't do any good. I've used every kind of tape you can imagine, including automotive, striping tape, all kinds of stuff. It doesn't matter. This stuff slides under it. This is just like CA glue. It goes everywhere. But anyway, that's pretty close. It needs a little bit more work yet on the staining, a little more detailing, but we're getting close to putting the finish back on it. It's about 1:15 in the afternoon, and I'm ready to go ahead and spray this back. I've put clear shellac in the bottle. I put about 10%, maybe 15% alcohol in there with it. So it's mostly shellac. I put a little bit of alcohol just to thin it a little bit. I'm going to try spraying it out of my little airbrush and see how that goes. That may be a poor decision. I don't know. I don't use this that often. When I do use it, I get pretty good results. So I thought it might be kind of handy to use that for applying this shellac and see how well that works. I'll take you outside and we'll give it a shot. Well, here we go. As I say, here goes nothing. Well, it goes on a lot faster with the regular spray gun, so I'll probably go back to that, but this is working pretty nicely.
From where I stand, I can see the smiles on their faces. The music plays on as I watch their tender embraces.
Going on nice and even, looks real nice, but I don't know, it's kind of hard to do. Now, I didn't tape off the front of this, so what I'm trying to do is not to spray at it, so we'll just see how it works.
From where I stand, I can see her dress as it's swaying. It seems to be waving goodbye to me.
Well, it's working pretty good. I wish I could switch hands now and do it with my other hand, but there's no way I could spray this with my left hand. There's just no way. I'm not coordinated enough, but it would make it a lot easier if I could.
From where I stand, I can hear the music and laughter. Carmilla tells me that's what her young heart is after.
This shellac dries really fast, so it's probably close to dry to the touch already on the back, probably. But I'm not going to touch it because I know if I did, it wouldn't be. Not looking bad. It's not looking bad. You always want better. Oh, I forgot to put the ring in the thing. Well, I guess I got to go put that ring in there in order to finish the rest of this so I can hold it. Always something, you know. I didn't put the ring in the end right there. Well, I'll go ahead and finish spraying this last little bit here. What's going on really nice. Yeah, I don't know how much it's going to take a lot of this to fill the grain.
I see her differently, I see her there with a man. Carmilla is lying to see from where I stand.
It's not looking too bad. 3 or 4 coats of that, and it probably will just about have it filled up.
Carmilla is lying, I see it from where I stand.
Can't hardly knock it. You can start to see a sheen in it, I think. It's starting to get there. I'm going to let that dry an hour or so, then I'll mix up another batch, but I'm going to use the regular sprayer, I think, the next time, and that'll go much easier, much faster. My arm gets kind of tired of holding it up here like this. It's been about 45 minutes. I've got the shellac in here now, and I'm going to give it a shot. Let's see how it goes. My friends, I'm back on this Gibson guitar that won't let me finish it. And I mean that in both ways. It won't let me put the finish on it, and it won't let me get done with this instrument so I can get it out of the shop. You know, I brag on this sandpaper to no end. It's 3M, lasts longer, advanced abrasive, no slip grip. I've got the 220, which might be part of my problem because I'm trying to use the fine stuff on this. But this is actually building up on this too, this shellac. That's the first thing I found that actually sticks to this sandpaper. And you can wipe off most of it, but there's still little hard things that are stuck to the sandpaper. Other than this shellac, that's the first thing I've found that sticks to it. You know, nothing else is stuck to it, but this shellac sure does. What a shame. Because that just adds to the complexity, just makes it that much harder to sand off. Because once this stuff sticks to it like that, then it just glides over, it doesn't sand anymore. Can you see the little nodules stuck to it there? I can wipe off most of that, but those little nodules, I don't know if you can see it shining there, maybe you can see them shining. They stay stuck. And then it just makes the sandpaper ineffective almost immediately. You can tell instantly when when you first start, the sandpaper is really sanding, and then it starts sliding like a pair of ice skates on top after that. Nothing gives you a break. Once something like this starts and you just have trouble, then nothing from that point on goes well. Every single thing that will every single time. And don't even tell me to use a sanding block with this. As soon as you put a sanding block on this, it does 10 times worse. And I'm not saying that. It does 10 times worse. You can't get anything sanded. You put a sanding block on this. Pitiful. Pitiful. I even let it cure under UV lights to try to make it even, more dry where it wouldn't coat the sandpaper. That didn't help either. It's got a lot of finish on here. I just can't sand it off. Oh, it's just so frustrating. I've never seen one fight me as hard as this one has fought me. No matter what I do, something has to throw a wrench in it. Now I'm going to try a little heavier grit. Maybe it won't stick so bad. I don't know. Give you a little background. I tried some 80 grit of this same kind of sandpaper, and that just scratched it too much, so I didn't have anything between 80 and 220. So I drove all the way to town, and I picked up some 150 and 120. The 150 works the best so far, but watch how quickly it builds up. I mean, right there, it's already stopped sanding. Can you see the buildup on it? You can't win. And that once you get those buildups on there, sandpaper is pretty much useless. So I turn it around and I use the other side of it. And then I'll even use these ends like that. But I mean, just that much sanding and you're pretty much done. So this piece of sandpaper now is pretty much useless unless you take like a wire brush and you clean it with a wire brush, and then you get to do it again. I mean, that's almost no sanding at all before you have to clean it. I've never had anything more aggravating in my whole life. It's just the most aggravating finish I've ever tried to work on, period. And by the way, don't tell me I should be using wet or dry, because wet or dry does the same thing on the buildup if I try to do it dry. And if I try to do it wet, this finish will get soft and turn milky and get all gooey. So you can't use water on shellac. It's just the most frustrating thing I've ever seen. The shellac has filled the grain. If I could sand it off, I could put my final coat on here and I'd be done. The grain is filled. I just need to be able to sand it level. My friends, I'm ashamed to say that weeks and weeks have gone by on this old Gibson guitar. But we're on the downhill slide finally. But it still isn't going away without a fight. I have got several coats of True Oil varnish on this now, and I am sanding it, obviously, as you can see. And the pores are finally filling. I used the shellac undercoat a bunch of times and improved the pore situation quite a bit. But finally, the True Oil varnish is finally covering it all and filling in the pores, and I'm able to sand, most of that out now. I'm going to sand it as good as I can sand it this time, hopefully without sanding through. And then I'm going to put on at least one more coat of oil varnish. And acoustically, this finish is very good, so this guitar probably will sound as good as it ever did, if not better. Probably better. So at least we're on the right track now. I'm not going to make you watch me sit here and do this for the next couple hours. So I'll show you what it looks like in the next step. I might also just add that this stuff sands like a dream compared to everything else that we've done on this guitar so far. Everything else would not sand without just coating up the sandpaper. You can see I can wipe this off and it's pretty much clean, which is awesome. So I think we're on the right track finally, but it's taken a while to get there. It definitely has set the record for the longest time I've ever kept an instrument in the shop. I've never kept an instrument this long. In fact, I don't remember ever keeping an instrument more than a couple of months prior to this one. This one's been here for getting close to a year now.